Good afternoon, dear friends. As always, we are here in our daily format to analyze the situation on the front lines. There is at least one area on the front where everything seems to be heading toward its inevitable conclusion. I am, of course, referring to the Velyka Novosilka area. But before we dive fully into the front lines, let's touch on something else. Yesterday, Trump made more flashy and controversial statements at the forum in Davos. Honestly, the man seems to think of himself as a messiah. One day he claims one thing, the next day he says something completely different, and by the third day it's something else entirely. He's confusing and contradictory. I believe there's no need to jump to conclusions prematurely. We should wait for the meeting between Putin and Trump and only then draw conclusions. Meanwhile, the front doesn't wait. It moves forward every day. Let's transition directly to analyzing the situation. Before we begin, I'd sincerely like to ask you to subscribe to this channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now let's open the map. Yesterday we talked about Velyka Novosilka, and today we'll continue discussing it, as things are changing very quickly. Sometimes not even over days, but hours. And here, in Velyka Novosilka, everything is approaching its finale. So what happened in this urban-type settlement over the past day? Significant changes occurred. The Russian army, particularly the Far Eastern units conducting the assault in this sector, broke through the Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF defenses, and managed to split the UAF garrison in the settlement into two parts. However, the situation is far more complex than just dividing the garrison into two groups with the possibility of retreat for each. No, this is an entirely different case. Neither side has a viable option to withdraw. That said, the UAF group in the northwestern part of the settlement still has a chance to try crossing the Mokry Yali River, whether by fording, wading, or finding some kind of crossing. They have indeed made attempts, multiple times in fact. However, the results are grim. Only about 2 in 10 manage to escape the encirclement. Meanwhile, the UAF group on the right bank side of the settlement has no options at all. They are entirely surrounded. The Russian forces have them encircled from the north, east, south, and even the west. Russian Marines were the ones who divided the settlement into two parts. Yesterday, the Russian military announced a corridor for surrender available to the surrounded UAF soldiers. Some refused to take this offer, choosing to die rather than be captured. Videos exist, but I can't show them here because they contain graphic scenes with many casualties. If you're interested, there's a link to my Telegram channel in the description where you can watch the footage. According to the same Far Eastern Marines, the UAF has already suffered 150 dead in this sector. However, there are reports that some UAF soldiers have begun using the corridor along Azovskaya Street toward Blahodatne to retreat from Velyka Novosilka. As for the situation in the northwestern part of the settlement, the UAF is also in bad shape, though it's not as critical as in the southeastern part. As I mentioned earlier, they still have a slim chance of escape, by fording or swimming across the river. Interestingly, UAF Command attempted external attacks yesterday and the day before to unblock the encircled garrison. These attacks came from two directions. 1. They tried to dislodge Russian forces from the northern part of Remivka. However, the result was merely destroyed armored vehicles. 2. Similarly, they attempted to break through near Novi Komar to open up the road for their garrison's withdrawal. Here, they lost additional BMPs, 2 tanks, and an APC. Realizing these attempts were futile, they seem to have abandoned the idea. Since last night, there have been no reports of counterattacks from the UAF to unblock their encircled forces. Meanwhile, the Russian army is steadily advancing in Velyka Novosilka. As I mentioned yesterday, areas including the dormitory, technical school, and Zareknaya Street are under Russian control. Additionally, the entire area around the Kashlagak River has been secured by Russian forces. Streets such as Agranaya, Fontanaya, and Veselaya are also under their control. Further progress is being reported near Taras Shevchenko Street, on the opposite side of the Kashlagak River. The football stadium in that area is surrounded on 3 sides, although it's not an ideal defensive stronghold for the UAF. If yesterday the UAF controlled almost half of the settlement, or perhaps slightly less, today their control has dropped to no more than 30%. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. By the time this video is published, there may already be new developments, as the situation here changes by the hour. Now let's move on to the line of contact and begin with the Sudzhan salient. Over the past day, the map has not undergone any changes. However, this area continues to see significant activity from Russian UAVs. Yesterday, we observed that most drone strikes were concentrated on the central and southern parts of Sudzha and the Sudzhan agglomeration. Today, FPV operators have shifted their focus slightly northward toward the areas of Makhnovka, Pravda, Cherkasko-Porechnoe, and others. At present, it seems the goal is to stretch the Ukrainian forces and mislead their command by striking various points within the Sudzhan salient. These maneuvers aim to obscure where the main strike will eventually occur. Judging by the constant shifts in the focus of FPV drones, it is reasonable to assume that a major offensive is indeed being prepared, but it remains unclear exactly where it will take place. As for adjustments along the front line, over the past day, the map shows no significant changes. Now we move to the northern Kupiansk direction, which has provided a lot of important and intriguing information. Today, the map has again seen changes. The northern Kupiansk direction is one of the most dynamic areas, with events unfolding rapidly. The Russian army continues to advance. Various posts and maps published daily indicate Russian flags appearing at different points in northern Kupiansk, highlighting the steady progress of the Russian forces. Yesterday, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced control over the settlement of Zapadnoe. Today, various mapping services are updating the surrounding areas around Zapadnoe, as well as along Highway R79 between Zapadnoe and Dvyreknoe. Some services have already reported that Dvyreknoe itself has come under Russian control. Based on this information and other posts, it can be concluded that a strong foothold has been established on the Ukrainian side of the Oskol River. This foothold could soon become the launch point for a Russian advance in one of two directions, toward Volchansk or Kupiansk. Ukrainian sources express greater concern about a potential Russian push toward Kupiansk. Should Russian forces manage to reach and secure the area around Blahodatovka and establish themselves on Kupiansk's northern outskirts, this could result in a flanking breakthrough that would trap the entire UAF grouping in the Kupiansk pocket, creating a dire situation for them. Next, let's shift to the central Kupiansk direction. Over the past day, some mapping services have noted minor expansions of Russian-controlled areas near the settlement of Nadezhda. Now moving to the southern Kupiansk direction, or perhaps it is more accurate to call it the Lyman direction. Over the past day, the Russian army significantly expanded its control along a network of strongpoints located between Kolodezi and northward toward the settlement of Novaya. Yesterday, we discussed how much manpower and reinforcements the Ukrainian side is deploying to this line to stabilize the front. However, we also emphasized the extremely high losses the UAF continues to suffer in their efforts to hold this direction. Today, various mapping services have updated their maps to show substantial expansions of Russian-controlled areas along the strongpoints, both to the north and south. The Russian side is not stopping there. Footage continues to be published of artillery strikes targeting UAF positions along this section of the front. Regarding the Lyman direction, the latest news suggests that the Russian side may soon deliver a major strike here with the aim of breaching UAF defenses and advancing directly to the northern outskirts of Lyman. Let's delve into the details of what is happening and why these events lead us to think so. We start with the settlement of Slavyansk. Today, the Russian side released very interesting footage showing reconnaissance operations north of Slavyansk, near the settlement of Mayaki. These operations uncovered a large concentration of UAF personnel and equipment in a wooded area north of Slavyansk. During these reconnaissance activities, significant clusters of tent camps and potential shelters were identified. Following this discovery, the Russian side launched massive strikes on the area using Iskander missile systems. Sources indicate that the footage shows elements of the UAF's 18th Brigade, which reportedly suffered heavy losses from these strikes. The Russian side primarily used cluster munitions, which significantly increased casualties in both personnel and equipment. The key point here is the location of this camp. It lies in the northern part of Donetsk, closer to Mayaki and toward Lyman.